I am very excited today. We've got a great show lined up. We've got our man Kirk right here with us. Before we speak to Kirk, I'm just going to say what the lineup is. We've got a couple of videos, and then we're going to say hello to everybody, and then we're going to jump into question period, and then we have a couple of more interesting pieces to watch at the end. It's going to be awesome. So, Kirk, what is up, my man? How are you today?
I am just top-notch, Ehren. I'm just twitchier than old Freeland here with excitement, waiting to see what's going to happen.
Today's going to be a fun day. We've got a few great videos planned, and we're just going to get ready to jump into that. And
vicious rumors I've heard about, and the gang may be interested. I hear you can do a pretty reasonable Menzies.
I can do a decent. I can pull off a Menzies if I have to. I like that guy a lot. Why do you bring that up?
Well, I think I will during the chat. It should be a gas. If we hit a certain number of likes, that'll be a good laugh.
Okay, awesome. We'll check it out. Let's drop into some videos, Kirk. Let's get it going. Hello, Shirley. Let's go.
Launched me this morning about the election of his press conference.
Later.
In order to hide our boss from Rebel News question. We caught it on camera, and we are going to show it to you. Mr. Guilbeault, I just want to clarify something. Ever since myself and Ezra Levin asked you a question earlier this week outside of the summit, our team had our media accreditation removed until we issue a legal demand letter in response. Today, for us to get inside this conference, I was lied about this conference to be postponed and to be changed, and nobody had get back to me. Was hard to get here. So how come the United Nations and yourself are not for press freedom? Alexa here in Ottawa, covering the other side of the story at the United Nations Plastic Summit. Elites and delegates from around the world flew in to discuss the future of plastic. These people are unelected and thus unaccountable. These foreigners consume huge amounts of fuel to travel to Canada while telling ordinary people to reduce our fuel consumption. Rebel News received accreditation to take part in this event, and we thank the UN for this. Telling the other side of the story and asking hard questions is our mandate, and it is usually not welcome at such events. There were several moments, however, where some people tried to obstruct our journalism. Stephen Guilbeault refused to answer questions asked of him by...
I don't mean to interrupt the program, but these guys at Rebel News are worth checking out. You should subscribe to their channel. They're easy to find on YouTube. I think I've got a link in the description below. Anyways, I'm a big fan of these Rebel News guys.
Is relevant on the first day of the conference while surrounded by his large entourage of drones.
You claim that your Twitter account was a personal account. If that's the case, why didn't you pay the fine personally?
Stephen Guilbeault was clearly unhappy with this incident, but that's part of the politician job that they sign in for. Following this, all our media accredited team members receive emails changing our accreditation status to pending. The press conference with Guilbeault was postponed, maybe to buy them time to figure out what to do with us, while a United Nations man tried to expel us from the room.
I don't want to miss it. I know, but it's just 2 minutes.
No.
Just 2 minutes.
No, I'm sorry. After?
Yeah. Sorry?
After.
After the press conference?
Yes. Thank you.
We stood our ground, though. Both UN staff and Guilbeault's team panicked after we politely asked 2 questions.
Ezra Levant for Rebel News, and I'd like to thank the UN for accrediting a citizen journalist outlet like us. Mr. Guilbeault, according to the Globe and Mail, you serve on the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, which is a government agency controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Is that a conflict of interest with your role as a Canadian cabinet minister? And is it perhaps why you have really been gentle on China, even though it is by far the world's largest polluter, including with plastics pollution?
Our accreditation status was quickly restored that same day, thanks to our lawyer who sent a legal letter to the United Nations. Their first tactic to cancel us failed. They again tried to obstruct our journalism the next day, but we were still accredited.
Have somebody from the UN come in
Okay.
to deal with your past not functioning, okay?
Yeah, okay, perfect.
It should be down in a few seconds. If you just want to step aside to let the other person.
A UN drone employee told me that someone complained about us after our street scrum.
Yeah.
Why then
Yeah, exactly.
all my colleagues suddenly receive all the same email
Yes.
that Rebel News was pending?
Oh no, yesterday, the receiving of the pending news yesterday was because a complaint was made that there was disturbance at the front of the building.
Which he said was why our accreditation status had changed. Again, scrumming politicians is part of our job as media and an essential tool for holding politicians accountable. As soon as we arrived at the conference center on Friday morning, a nervous and agitated female security officer tried to delay our entry by physically obstructing us and awkwardly asking questions about our media accreditation.
Ça va bien?
Oui.
She also whispered something to a UN security.
Sorry, I just want to check, is there any problem? Because the woman at the entrance, she came to us and she was like really, like, I don't know, agitated, and she let us enter and she came to see you like, afterwards, and you, the security woman with the curly hair.
No.
Yeah, she called you when we enter.
No.
I just want to know, is there any problem?
No, not at all.
After we arrived at the conference center for the media scrum with Guilbeault, one of the minister's staffers began moving the press conference banner and table into a room marked staff only. Guilbeault's secretary then told me that the press conference was postponed until the afternoon without any further details.
You know, you work for the United Nations, no? Or
Avec
the press conference is supposed to take place here.
On n'a pas de press conference ce matin.
Oui, il y a un scrum.
Non, pas ce matin.
J'ai reçu l'invitation.
Ouais, c'est plus tard cet après-midi parce que toute l'avant-midi a été décalée.
Décalé par quoi?
Par un événement privé avec le ministre. J'ai pas encore de localisation pour la conférence de presse, mais je peux vous tenir au courant. J'ai juste pas cette information-là sur moi encore.
OK. Votre nom?
Caitlin.
Caitlin?
Oui.
Caitlin, mais vous n'avez pas une carte ou comment que je peux faire pour vous rejoindre?
Je vais être ici, je vais sortir pour vous dire.
What she told us was a completely different information that what she mentioned to other media. For them, it was the same hour, different level.
Recital 4e étage.
Ils l'ont changé.
Au 4e étage, dans Open Space, ils vont mettre une bannière dans le fond, comme, puis c'est pas une salle, c'est...
À 11h30?
11h15.
11h15? I'm going there.
They probably didn't expect us to follow the other media outlets who needed to drag the heavy equipment to the elevator. At the new location, news media received a private message from Guilbeault's secretary telling them to come back to the original location.
She texted me, hey, it's going to be here in front of the painting, finally, first floor. So we gotta go back down. Gotta go back down.
Are you kidding?
Of course, we were not informed of this, but we followed again. You cannot trick us with this kind of tactic. I then asked Guilbeault if he and the UN believe in press freedom since they did so much to get rid of us. Mr. Guilbeault, I just want to clarify something. Ever since myself and Ezra Levin asked you a question earlier this week outside of the summit, our team had our media accreditation removed until we issue a legal demand letter in response. Today, for us to get inside this conference, I was lied about this conference to be postponed and to be changed, and nobody had get back to me. It was hard to get here. So how come the United Nations and yourself are not for press freedom? Our question is too hard?
I think I heard your colleague, Mr. Levin, thank the United Nations the other day in the press conference for taking his question. Obviously, Canada does not issue accreditation for media or for participant. This is a United Nations forum, but your colleague thanked the United Nations the other day.
Yeah, but how come your media relation actually lied to me and actually tell me that that was not happening anymore and that was postponed for this afternoon?
I have worked with my colleague for 4 years and she's never lied. So I'm sorry, but I profoundly disagree with the characterization of your question.
You can see how they operate to cancel and stifle the voice of independent media. If you wish to support our hard work, legal
Check out their
fees,
channel, guys.
and
It's a lot of
travel
fun.
expenses, please consider contributing what you can at nogreenreset.com, and don't forget to sign our petition.
The leader of the official opposition was back in the House of Commons today after being kicked out yesterday for using language the Speaker of the House deemed unparliamentary. Here's a little bit of a taste from yesterday.
The leader opposite is showing us exactly what shameful, spineless leadership looks like. He shakes the hands of a leader of a white nationalist group, then goes to actively court the support of the group's members and thinks he can get away with it.
That, like everything else he says, is false. When will we put an end to this WACKO policy by this WACKO Prime Minister?
No. There are a couple of things which are going on here today, which is not acceptable.
Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was ejected after that, and the rest of the Conservative caucus followed him. Today, they were all back, and our chief political correspondent David Ehren was watching to see how everyone would behave. David.
Well, Donna, if Tuesday's question period was remarkable for its rancor, today's was just as remarkable for its tranquility. Here's an example of the tone of today's exchanges.
Will he announce now that his experiment with legalizing hard drugs in BC is over? Yes or no?
It was like that for an hour. No name calling on any side. The backbenchers all staying silent, with little or no clapping and definitely no heckling. Everyone on their best behavior. The Conservatives say they took that approach because they want to focus on the drug crisis in BC and elsewhere, and were not interested in picking a spat with what they see as a partisan speaker, Liberal MP Greg Fergus. But the Prime Minister tried to pick a fight several times, repeating Tuesday's accusations that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives pander to white nationalists.
But the leader of the opposition has not answered Canadians' concerns about why he will not condemn Diagolon, the far-right extremist organization, why he will not reject the endorsement of Alex Jones, noted conspiracy theorist.
The day before, those had been the opening salvos to that out-of-control question period. But today, Poilievre brushed off the bait and stuck to his focus, the drug crisis.
This is the Prime Minister who has to answer for the people who are dying every day due to his policies.
Now, speaking to some MPs from all parties, don't expect this perfectly civil approach to last. It really was a one-day response to Tuesday's tantrums. Expect a degree of heckling, cheering, and jeering to return as soon as Thursday's question period. Donna?
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa.
All right, gang. So now we're into the next thing, which is saying hello to everybody. So we're going to try to wrap that off as quickly as, well, not as quickly as possible, but question period is about to kick off. So I want to say hello to Patty, want to say hello to Kirk, Sheila, you guys, what's up? My man Dave, my man, is Two Flips in the room yet? I don't know. Boomer Media, good to see you. Mama T, what is up? Raz, good to see you. Yeah, we don't get enough sleep around here. We're going to get caught up. The old goat, what's going on? Dive Crew Canada, my brother, what's going on? Cryptomeria, what is going on, my sister? Who else do we have? Bud Wilson, sorry. Again, the order of these don't mean anything. I'm just going through the list and trying to remember who is all here. Joan, my girl, what is going on? Good to see you always. Mr. Pickles, my brother. What's shaking? Terry Hooper, good to see you. I saw Silver Fox earlier. There were some people in the room early. And I mean to catch everybody. If we didn't catch everyone, we're doing the best we can. We're going to jump into question period now. We have that ready to go. Probably going to have to watch a commercial. I'll spare you guys the audio on that. So it should be a pretty exciting show. They're predicting that today is going to be out of hand. So I'm glad that everybody's here because it probably is going to be out of hand. Here we go, guys.
John was a UBC-trained lawyer, Minister of the Crown, and the first speaker to be elected by secret ballot.
What's up, Calamaru? Good to see you.
He was a voracious reader with a keen sense of humor and orator of note who loved the outdoors. As Chief Opposition Whip and on behalf of a grateful nation, I thank Speaker Fraser for his service to our province and to our country. My thoughts are with his friends and his three daughters, Sheena,
What's up, James?
Anna,
How are you?
And Mary, and their children as they mourn his loss. Thank you.
What's up, nature? Good day.
I thank the honourable member.
What's up, Harry? Good to see you.
An extraordinary Canadian, John Allen Fraser. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. May is Borderline Personality Disorder Awareness Month. BPD is a serious, complex mental health disorder stemming primarily from chronic dysregulation of the emotions. People suffering from BPD, nearly 2% of the population, have a very hard time controlling their emotions and tend to be sensitive and reactive. The Sash Bear Foundation is committed to raising awareness of BPD. Since its creation in 2012 by Lynn Curry and Mike Menu, who are now in Ottawa, this charitable organization has restored hope, taught skills, and offered community to more than 10,000 families seriously affected by the mental health problems of a loved one. Every year, the foundation organizes the Sash Bear Walk, which brings together hundreds of supporters to create an orange sea of support, reduce stigma, and raise awareness of this illness and our national mental health crisis. Visit sashbear.org to learn more about BPD and how to reduce stigma.
The honourable member from Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, teams from around the world are gathering in Calgary next week for the World Para Hockey Championships, and I'm so pleased to share that the starting goalie for Team Canada is none other than Adam Kingsmill from my home community of Smithers, BC. Despite losing his leg in a tragic lawnmower accident when he was just a toddler, Adam became an accomplished athlete, playing softball, racing motocross, and excelling at stand-up hockey, all with the incredible support of his parents, Bobby and Grange. In 2016, he caught the eye of Team Canada's coaches, who convinced him to try para-hockey or sledge hockey. And 5 years later, he brought home a silver medal from the World Championships in the Czech Republic. He followed that up just a year later with another silver, this time at the Paralympic Games in Beijing, China. Adam's indomitable spirit, his determination and achievement continue to inspire people across northern BC and across Canada. I hope my colleagues will join me in wishing him and his teammates the very best of luck at this year's World Championships. Go Canada, go Adam.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, one of my constituents has made it into the Guinness Book. Jenny Barret, who suffers from the rare genetic disorder osteogenesis imperfecta, completed her 10th wheelchair marathon in London 2 weeks ago. In doing so, she clocked the fastest marathon ever run by a woman in a wheelchair, 4 hours, 19 minutes, and 21 seconds. In doing so, she beat the 1983 record set by no less than an Olympian. Jenny may be battling brittle bone disease, but she also has nerves of steel. The woman who suffered 157 fractures in her life has never stopped training for some 20 years in her second home, the St. Hyacinthe Boxing Club, originally founded by her father Bernard. She's certainly not going to stop now. She's a model of unflagging determination who should inspire us all. Jenny, my dear friend, you're a source of pride to our region and to all of Quebec.
The Honourable Member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Canadians are way past their breaking point. It's so bad that the CEO of Food Banks Canada now says that food banks are becoming unsustainable. Canadian food bank usage is at a historic high, 2 million people per month. Food banks cannot meet this demand. For people that have not been forced to the food banks and still utilize their local grocery store, let's consider some facts from a new report by Canada's food professor. 60% of Canadians are so desperate that they are eating expired or spoiled food. 20% of households with the lowest incomes use over 20% of their disposable income just to buy food. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of short-sighted policies of this liberal NDP government, families are sliding deeper and deeper into debt. This is not the Canada that I grew up in, and this is not the Canada that we want to raise our children in. Common sense Conservatives will rebuild our economy and bring home lower prices for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Mississauga East, Cokesville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this February 7th, we had a historic vote on my motion M75 in the House of Commons. Unanimously, all members of Parliament spanning various political affiliations and regions of our country resoundingly gave an unwavering support for declaring May as Polish Heritage Month and designating May 3rd as Polish Constitution Day in Canada. Today, on Polish National Flag Day, parliamentarians from Canada and Poland, the Polish Embassy, Ambassador Jelski, Consuls General, the Canadian Polish Congress, and the community at large came together to commemorate these milestones on Parliament Hill for the first ever Polish flag raising. As we recognize and celebrate Polish Heritage Month and May 3rd Constitution Day from coast to coast to coast, and with the Polish and Canadian flags flying proudly on Parliament Hill, I say dziękuję bardzo. Thank you so much, the entire Polish-Canadian community. Nedzia Polska, Nedzia Canada.
Oral questions.
Here we go.
The Honourable Member from
No Trudeau, though. Trudeau's not in his chair. Oh, look at this. Andrew Scheer going to kick it off.
Prime Minister make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date, please.
Short and sweet.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
All right, Freeland is up.
Mr. Speaker, the province of BC made a request for a temporary pilot project. BC now has concerns about that project, which we share. We are now working together to address those concerns. Opioid addiction is a tragedy that has affected far too many Canadian families. We have to work together to solve it, not score cheap partisan points off the pain of Canadians. There are no pilot projects anywhere else in Canada.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Because of this government's decision, it is no longer illegal to smoke crack, meth, or shoot up heroin in public spaces in British Columbia like parks, hospitals, and public transit. The British Columbia government has now begged the Prime Minister to reverse this decision. So, simple question, when will the Prime Minister once again make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we believe in working together with Canadians to solve our country's most pressing problems. That's why earlier this week I was in touch with Premier Eby, and I assured him that we share his concerns and we are working urgently together to address them. And let's remember, opioid addiction is a tragedy which is afflicting so many Canadian families. Let's work together to help them not score cheap partisan points.
Cheap partisan
the
points.
Member from Regina Capel.
Dangerous addictions are hurting Canadians. After this government's decision to change the law, overdose deaths shot up and drug-related crime went through the roof. Now, the British Columbia government is asking for the government to reverse their decision. It's a simple question. It's a simple decision to make. So one final time, Mr. Speaker. On what date will this government make it illegal to smoke crack in a hospital room? Just the date.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservative House Leader, I've actually been in touch with the Premier of BC about this truly pressing issue. And unlike the Conservatives, we are working collaboratively with the province of BC. We share their concerns, and we are working together to support public health and public safety. What we're not doing is fundraising off of the pain, death, and suffering of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Every day that this radical Prime Minister dithers on the deadly experiment of legalising hard drugs is another day that people die. Currently 6 a day in British Columbia. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, Quebec is not immune to this crisis, which affects every part of Canada. I quote from the Journal de Montréal, "Crack use is exploding in Montreal and we'll be seeing more and more of it in public places." Will the Prime Minister put an end to his extremist experiment in legalising hard drugs and say no to any expansion in Quebec? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, British Columbia has asked for a pilot project. British Columbia now has certain serious concerns
What's
that
up,
we
Pupped
share.
Up? How are you?
And that is the reason for
We
which
have a few new people
we
that
will
are
be
in the room
working
now.
urgently in close
NK-Do, is that
collaboration
how you
with
say
the
that?
province to meet these concerns. Mr. Speaker, these
Justice
are
Warrior,
tragedies
good day.
for families throughout Canada. We need to
Scott
put
Campbell, my
partisanship
man,
aside
what's up?
when it comes to this kind of matter. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable. It's not partisanship to talk about syringes on the floor, degrading scenes and outbursts a stone's throw from a school in Montreal. Now that we know that the radical experiment in legalising hard drugs in British Columbia by the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc Québécois, by the way, was catastrophic and deadly. The Blockiste MP for Joliette said in this House, the hope is that this pilot project will pave the way. The MP for Rimouski said, we in the Bloc Québécois are deeply convinced that this is a step in the right direction. Quebec doesn't want this. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that he will not follow the radical advice of the Bloc Québécois? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, the opioid epidemic and addiction is a tragedy that we have to fight together by giving a priority to the health and safety of Canadians. But, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives are just saying that our policy is extremist and radical. Do you know, Mr. Speaker, what is extremist and radical? White supremacy policy. Misogyny is radical. And so it's time for the Conservatives to denounce those policies that are truly extremist and radical. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. La Presse reported today that CBC's management is planning a rapprochement between the English network and Radio-Canada. Radio-Canada is not in crisis. CBC is. A rapprochement necessarily comes with concessions, and these concessions will be made at the expense of Quebec culture and creators. It necessarily means taking away a bit of our cultural identity to assimilate it with that of English Canada. This is a dangerous, slippery slope. Can the Prime Minister reassure French-speaking Quebecers and Canadians that the government has absolutely no intention of merging CBC and Radio-Canada? The Honourable Deputy Minister, Prime Minister, and the Minister for Finance. A big thank you for the question.
What's up, Don Bagcoins? How are you today? Good to see you.
We fully share the concerns of all Canadians, especially the concerns of
What's up, Serena? Did I catch you
Quebecers
before?
when it comes to the French language, when it comes to Quebec culture. And I can assure all Canadians that French broadcasting will not be affected. That's a priority for us. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we have a proposal. Instead of bringing CBC and Radio-Canada closer together, we should make them independent of each other. CBC has its challenges. Radio-Canada has its own. The two have neither the same cultural identity, nor the same audience, nor the same corporate culture. These are two completely separate entities. But what CBC management is proposing, a management appointed by the Liberals, by the way, is to weaken Radio-Canada in order to strengthen CBC.
What's up, Nancy? Good to see you.
In the long term,
How are
this
things in
means
New Brunswick
assimilating
today?
the French-language public broadcaster. Why not turn it into two completely separate crown corporations? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr.
What's
Speaker,
up, True Blue?
We share people's concerns with regards to the French language in Canada, and with regards to French culture, and with regards to Quebec culture in Canada. On this side of the House, we will always, always, always work as hard as we can to support the French language, Canadian and Quebec culture in French. We will always support Radio-Canada.
L'honorable député de Rosemont, la petite patrie.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont, la Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, another report, another failure. With this Minister for the Environment at the wheel, Canada is going to miss its GHG emissions targets. No wonder. Everyone will remember the Liberals' environmental legacy. The purchase of Trans Mountain, $34 billion of our money in one big pipe. And still, billions garroted just like that for the oil companies, gobbling up public money, polluting and destroying our climate. The Minister of the Environment should be proud. Can the Liberals take responsibility for once and stop pretending to be interested in the climate crisis? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance. Mr. Speaker, our government has done more in the fight against climate change than any federal government in the history of Canada. We've put a price on pollution. We have a massive industrial program to the tune of $93 billion to stimulate our green transition. We are and we should be proud of what we do, and we know that we can and will do more.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have been letting the ultra-rich off the hook for years. But thanks to the NDP's capital gains changes, the wealthiest will pay a little more. And the Conservative leader doesn't like this. Maybe that's why he's getting wined and dined tonight by Bay Street billionaires at a Cash for Access fundraiser. Like the Liberals, the Conservatives would rather hand out billions to wealthy CEOs than fund the services people really need. Why are the Liberals maintaining the Conservatives' corporate giveaways?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I am really glad that the member opposite has raised an issue about which the Conservatives have been notably silent. and that is our increase in the inclusion rate on capital gains. We agree with the member opposite that it is just not fair for a nurse or carpenter to pay tax at a higher marginal rate than a multimillionaire. But I agree with the member opposite. I think the Conservatives support that kind of unfair tax policy.
The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
The Liberal Minister for legalizing hard drugs is misleading Canadians. Yesterday, she told Canadians that Liberals were waiting for further information from British Columbia in response to BC's request to end this legalization experiment. Yet, just yesterday, the BC minister responsible told us that they had responded to the government in just a few hours. This, when BC had 2,500 overdoses in just 1 year. Why are the Liberals misleading Canadians, and will they end their radical drug policy?
The Honourable Minister for Addictions and Mental Health.
Mr. Speaker, the opioid crisis is affecting communities and families across this country, and it's a tragedy. That is why the BC government approached the federal government for a 3-year pilot program. BC communities are facing extremely serious challenges, and people are dying from deadly street drugs, and public consumption is a concern. BC is amending their proposal, and we are supporting them in this work, Mr. Speaker, because that's what we do. We partner together to save lives. What is their plan, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Well, they did partner together. They partnered together for a radical policy that has led to countless deaths. Imagine an elderly woman in hospital having to sit beside somebody, lay beside somebody who is smoking crystal meth.
The honourable member to start again. I'm hearing some voices from the far end of this room, which I cannot hear, and I'm asking.
He won't stop. This Greg Fergus is a nut.
From the top. The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Imagine.
The minister is correct. The Liberals have partnered with somebody. They partnered with the provincial NDP to create a crisis of unprecedented proportions that led to people dying due to their radical policy. After 9 years, this Liberal NDP government is flooding the market with free drugs. This is happening to our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, our mothers, our children. They are all being fueled with addiction of the free drugs. Will the Prime Minister reverse course and end his radical experiment of legalization?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we work with our provincial jurisdictions to ensure the health and safety of Canadians in the face of this toxic drug supply. We are treating this with urgency, Mr. Speaker, and all partners are working together to find a path forward as fast as possible to provide operational clarity for law enforcement, healthcare services, and all those who are involved in saving lives, Mr. Speaker. We want the same thing, public safety and access to public health care services for those who need it. They would cut everything. We are here to save lives.
Yeah. She looks like she's saving a lot of lives.
Before I pass the microphone again to the minister, for the honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country, I'm going to ask all members, please, to hold your comments until you're recognized to have the floor.
Oh my goodness!
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake
Patty,
Country.
what do you think of that?
Mr. Speaker, the
Lord.
Liberal minister responsible for legal hard drugs in British Columbia isn't being straight with Canadians. Yesterday, she said she's waiting for more data from BC to decide if she would reverse her decision to legalize drugs like cocaine, opioids, and fentanyl in parks, playgrounds, and hospitals. The BC NDP confirmed yesterday they answered the Liberal government's request for more data within hours. Wow. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, drug deaths tragically rose 380%, as if that wasn't enough data. Why won't the Liberals be honest with Canadians and just end their radical drug policies?
That's a great question. The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we speak to our provincial counterparts and those who are the experts and with lived and living experience. The opposition, the member from Carleton, won't even meet with Mom Stop the Harm or other experts and those who are advocating for their families and their lives. We continue to work with our BC counterparts. They have provided amendments to their proposals, and we are working together to face the public consumption issues.
The honourable member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I speak to residents in my community, and the minister isn't listening to British Columbians. She didn't listen to BC mayors who wanted to stop open drug use in their community a year ago. She's not listening to BC parents horrified to find crack pipes and needles near schools and playgrounds. A student project from a school in my community had students writing to me about issues important to them. Unbelievably, crime and open drug use was the #1 issue. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Why won't these Liberals be honest with Canadians and just end their radical drug policy?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives aren't genuine with Canadians about their care or concern for those who are dying from the toxic drug supply. The opposition leader talks a big talk about investing in treatment, but Conservatives cut 2/3 of their drug treatment fund when they were in power, Mr. Speaker. They only focus on treatment and recovery. They don't focus on safe consumption sites. They don't focus on harm reduction as health care. Mr. Speaker, we need to partner with everyone. When will they listen?
Not a big fan of SACs, guys.
The honourable
SAC
member
is something.
from Mission Mashpee Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal minister
Well,
responsible
these, though.
for legal hard drugs is misleading Canadians. Drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death among youth aged 10 to 18 in British Columbia.
Shameful.
Just yesterday, she said she was waiting on more information from the BC NDP government, which the province said they delivered within hours. How much more information does she need to end their radical and extremist policy, which is putting the children of British Columbia at risk?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Freeland, gross.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, I have been in touch with the province of BC. BC requested the pilot project, and I was in touch this week with the Premier of BC. He and his government have serious concerns.
What's wrong with her
about the pilot
today?
project.
She's not on
We
their
share
drugs.
those
She's
concerns,
less twitchy.
and we are working together with BC to address them. But I do want to say, making political hay out of the pain of suffering Canadian families is simply irresponsible.
The honourable member from Mission Mashpee Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, this government is supposed to be in the business of protecting children, not killing them with exposure and access to hard drugs. The RCMP has confirmed that legal hard drugs are being sold on the black market. In Abbotsford, the Soccer Association has to regularly sweep the needles for pitch. The Legion and many businesses in Mission have to deal with crack smoke every day. When will this government do the right thing and cancel their ideologically extreme experiment to legalize hard drugs and start protecting BC's children?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as a mother of 3, including teenagers, I care so much about Canada and Canadians, and I agree, opioid addiction is a tragedy. It is a public health tragedy, and it is a public safety tragedy. But let me tell you what is putting the public safety of all Canadians at risk. Consorting with white supremacists and misogynists. That is a public safety risk. The Conservatives have an opportunity today to disavow that. They should do it.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Yesterday, the National Assembly adopted a historic unanimous motion. It, and I quote, denounces the refusal of the New Democratic, the Conservative and the Liberal parties of Canada to recognise the principle of respect for Quebec's areas of jurisdiction and to grant Quebec the right to opt out with full compensation. This is the very first time that the National Assembly of Quebec has unanimously blamed each and every Federalist party by name because they're all working against Quebec. When the government says it is working hand in hand with Quebec, are they working hand in hand rather with these parties against Quebec? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, going against the Bloc Québécois isn't going against Quebec because we are working with Quebec on housing, on seniors, on young people, on childcare, so that kids can go to work with their stomachs full. But the Bloc Québécois is always against all of this. They do the opposite of what we promise for Quebecers. We're trying to fight for seniors. We're trying to fight against climate change, and they always vote against. So shame on them, Mr. Speaker. Before the member for Joliette has the floor, I would like to encourage members in this House to not interrupt the person who has the floor. And I hope that this will be applicable as well for when the honourable member for Joliette takes the floor, which is now. Thank you,
I wonder
Mr.
if he'll be
Speaker.
there in a month.
It's historic, this unanimous motion. Canada's Liberals have been denounced by their Liberal allies in Quebec. The NDP was denounced by Québec Solidaire. The Conservatives, well, they weren't denounced by their ally, Éric Duhem, well, because he has no MPs, and Quebecers don't vote Conservative. But they too were condemned by the unanimous National Assembly of other stripes. All the elected representatives in Quebec City can see that all the Federalist elected representatives in Ottawa are working to undermine Quebec's ability to make their own social choices, or societal choices rather. Does the government realise the precedent it has set? The Honourable Minister for Transport. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives do have an ally. It's the Bloc Québécois. It's the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Speaker. They always seem to vote together. There's a bit of malaise in that corner. When one makes a promise and one does the opposite, then promises are shattered, promises for those who trusted them and voted for them. They say they want to fight for seniors, they say they want to fight for the environment, but they always vote against. Why? Because they just simply follow the Conservative playbook. The honourable member for Joliette. The federal government in this budget wants to tell Quebecers how to run Quebec, whether it's in healthcare, housing or any other area. Liberal Conservative NDPs, by refusing to amend the budget, the three parties have eminently shown that they want to become the puppet masters of Quebec. However, yesterday's unanimous response from the National Assembly was clear. We, Quebecers, still want to be masters in our own homes. Does the Minister for Finance see that Quebecers do not accept that elected representatives of the neighbouring nation should decide Quebecers' priorities instead of Quebecers? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in my riding, a number of our priorities is to have access to quality and affordable dental care. And big news, since yesterday, thousands of people in my riding and throughout Quebec now have access to dental care. Affordable and quality dental care. This is huge news for all Canadians, and it's great news for all Quebecers as well.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
The Liberal government's dangerous drug policy in BC allows people to smoke crack on a public bus, to shoot up next to a park with people with children playing there, to blow smoke from meth in the face of a nurse in a hospital. Now we learn what the Liberals want to do to Toronto, what they've done to BC. The Leader of the Opposition sent the Prime Minister a letter asking him to reject Toronto's request. Are the nurses in Toronto getting people who smoke meth in hospital rooms, or will they finally reject the request?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are completely committed to working with communities across this country in facing the opioid crisis and the tragedies that are happening to so many families. Every request is reviewed on a case-by-case basis. The member should know this. Toronto Public Health has not submitted a proposal that adequately addresses the dual objectives of public health and public safety, which have guided us throughout addressing the opioid crisis. Every level of government, including the province, must be engaged in this process, and we continue to work together.
The honourable member from Thornhill.
Speaker, their plan is killing 22 Canadians every day, and opioid deaths have doubled in this country in just 2 years. I can't believe that the minister from Toronto wants to expand this lawlessness into her own city. Otherwise, she would just say no. I'll give her an opportunity to just say that. One more opportunity to stop this extremist experiment on the streets of Toronto. Yes or no? Will you reject it?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a minister, I'm
Hand
a
on the
Toronto
hip,
MP,
huh?
I'm a Toronto mother. I know, as everyone in this House should, that the opioid crisis is a tragedy, and there are no families in Canada that are untouched by it. The BC pilot project was requested by BC. BC has serious concerns. We share those concerns. We are addressing it. There is no other pilot project anywhere in Canada, and the BC experience should and will be instructive.
The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 24 hours since the Leader of the Opposition sent the Prime Minister a letter asking him to reject Toronto City Hall's request to legalize hard drugs. And we're getting no serious answers from this NDP Liberal government. After seeing death and disorder in BC, why can't the Prime Minister take the no-brainer and say no? At what time today can we expect an answer to Toronto City Hall?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I think the members opposite were not listening to my previous answer. The only pilot project in Canada is in BC. BC has serious concerns. We share them, and we're acting urgently together to resolve them. There are no other pilot projects anywhere in Canada. I think all Canadians are aware of the BC experience and need to take it into account. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? We've invested $200 billion in the healthcare system. They voted against it.
They've invested money. Like, an investment is not a result.
People in Port Moody Coquitlam are struggling to keep up with the skyrocketing rents and grocery prices. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader is schmoozing with Canada's wealthiest at a $3,500 a year wine club. This is the guy who said he'd cut dental care and pharmacare in favor of keeping billion-dollar corporate handouts. And the Liberals are no better. They're letting big grocery CEOs rack up obscene profits while Canadians go hungry. When will the Liberals stop this corporate greed?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, in the recent federal budget, we put forward a plan to establish fairness for every generation that's going to ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so we can fund the things that really matter to the people who've been struggling the last couple of years. We've got plans that are going to reduce the cost of living by reducing the cost of housing, by solving the housing crisis. We've got a plan to launch a national school food program to make sure that hungry kids can put food on the table. And as I give this answer, the Conservatives jeer because they do not support the measures that are going to help vulnerable people in this country. We will stand up for the middle class. We will stand up for the vulnerable. It's a shame the Conservatives won't join us.
This cabinet is a bunch of clowns, guys. I think. What do you think?
Mr. Speaker, while rich CEOs make record profits, families in Nanaimo Ladysmith can barely put food on the table. And what's the Conservative leader doing about it? Well, he's hosting a fundraiser with Canada's richest elites that cost thousands just to step through the door. It's no wonder when he was in power, the biggest corporations got $60 billion in handouts while gutting services to British Columbians. And the Liberals, they maintain these handouts. Will the government end these corporate giveaways?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I would agree with my colleague that it's disturbing to see the Leader of the Opposition siding with big corporate at a time where, Mr. Speaker, all Canadians should be united to put pressure on the grocery in this country, Mr. Speaker. If they are really honest about caring for Canadians on the other side, Mr. Speaker, let them speak up. Let them tell the Loblaws and Walmart to adopt the grocery code of conduct in this country, Mr. Speaker. If we speak with one voice, we're going to improve the lives of Canadians. Are they going to do it?
The honourable member from
They think it's all funny.
Mr. Speaker, Halifax is home to
This is my MLA,
with
or pardon me, my
potential,
MP,
and it's
Andy
essential to
Fillmore.
provide the support necessary to fully unleash
I've got stories to tell about Andy Fillmore.
Halifax researchers are making advancements in ocean science, brain repair, lithium-ion battery technology, pediatrics, and so much more. Their work contributes to the economic and social prosperity of Canada and improves the lives of all Canadians. Could the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry please tell us how Budget 2024 will support research and researchers in Halifax and across Canada?
You're here.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, what a great question from a great member, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, come on.
This is a colleague which has been advocating
Kiss
for
each other's
research and
butts
science
like
in
that.
this country, Mr. Speaker. Canada researchers and students are our greatest resource in this country. Researchers at Dalhousie, Mr. Speaker, are pushing the boundaries of brain health, big data, and ocean research. In Budget 2024, we invested $3.4 billion in our world-leading talent, Mr. Speaker. Students will see an increase in their stipends to support their research and attract the best and brightest. Mr. Speaker, the science of today is the economy of tomorrow. Let's invest in our futures together.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, interest on the debt is skyrocketing and will continue to do so while spending remains out of control. And the Bloc continues to support these liberal centralizing policies that are driving up the cost of living. For example, on December 13th, the Bloc voted for over $20 billion in budgetary items. When will the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop wasting money so that Quebecers can start enjoying a decent life again? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to finally have a question on the economy, because this gives me the opportunity to share some good news from the Governor of the Bank of Canada. He said today that we have gone through a long road in the fight against inflation, and recent progress is encouraging. The message to Canadians is the following: we are getting close to the goal. This is good news thanks to the work of Canadians. Thank you for the opportunity. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'll remind the Minister of Finance that 48% of Liberal supporters finds that their government is not managing public finances well. That was in a recent Léger poll. Even worse, there's the Bloc, which pretends to be critical and to defend Quebec's interests. They voted for $500 billion in additional budget items. It's really, really, really expensive to vote for the Bloc, the party that supports this financial disaster. When will the Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop their out-of-control spending and give Quebecers some respite? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our colleague is talking about poor management. Mr. Speaker, have you already heard that during the whole term of the Conservative leader when he was Minister of Housing, he built six affordable housing units throughout the country? In the writing of my colleague over the past few months, I have an updated number. There are 222 affordable housing units that have been built in just his writing, 6 during the whole term of the Conservative leader as Housing Minister. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I'm speaking to the Professor of the Université de Laval or the Procurement Minister. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of living has never been higher. People are being squeezed. Mortgages, housing, food, everything is more expensive. This Liberal government isn't worth the cost, and neither is the Bloc Québécois. Just a reminder, it was the Bloc that voted for $500 billion in budgetary items. We're talking about $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending that has been supported by the Bloc Québécois. When will this Prime Minister stop its waste so that Quebecers can skip the food banks and regain their dignity? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, once again, a good opportunity to talk about the economy. First, we have a responsible policy fiscally. We have a AAA credit rating, the highest possible, and I'll refer to the Bank of Canada's governor who's talked about the good progress on inflation. But the Conservatives, their only policy is austerity and cut. They want to cut daycares, cut school food programs, and cut Radio-Canada CBC, which is so important for Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Liselet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of budgetary chaos, this government, supported by the Bloc, continues with its inflationary spending. They are throwing money out the window. The Bloc talks about the importance of health transfers, but they voted for $500 billion in centralizing spending, which has more interest costs than the money that goes to health transfers. The more this government spends, the more the Bloc supports it. When will the Prime Minister stop wasting taxpayer money? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, Canadians who are listening today understand that they have a choice. On one side of the House, Mr. Speaker, they hear the voice of a party that has no ambition, no vision, no plan for the future. On this side of the House, what people understand is that they have a Liberal government, a government that has a vision for the future, a government that has a plan for the coming generations, a government that has ambition for our country, Mr. Speaker. What I tell Canadians is listen to what you're hearing. You'll see that on this side of the House, we will fight for you every day. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. We've learned that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions rose between 2021 and 2022. They're going up when they should be going down. But what's most catastrophic is that they're going to keep skyrocketing because Ottawa opened Trans Mountain yesterday. The Minister of the Environment has just turned on the dirty oil tap. Another 600,000 barrels every day are piped out of the oil sands for export. Can the Minister of the Environment explain to us how his new dirty oil pipeline will help us lower emissions? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question and remind him that greenhouse gas emissions are 44 million tons lower in 2024 than they were before the pandemic. That's the equivalent of 13 million vehicles taken off our roads. Greenhouse gas emissions have never been as low in Canada in 25 years. So that's when Conor McGregor was born. So things are going very well, but I agree with my colleague, there's much work to be done still. The Honourable Member for Jonquière.
What's the Conor McGregor
Greenpeace
reference
told
for?
Radio Canada, CBC, that the missing link in the federal climate plan is a cap on emissions from the oil sector. The minister must be relieved that there's no ceiling on emissions because he would have banged his head on it with the Trans Mountain emissions. It's a reminder that Canada is the fourth largest petromonarchy in the world. With Trans Mountain, it consolidates its fourth place between Russia and Iraq at the top of the worst polluters. We know that the minister never dreamed of being a petromonarch. So will he ever put a limit on his country's greed for black gold? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague mentioned Greenpeace. Greenpeace in that same interview recognized that we are making progress in Canada and that this year's record is very encouraging, but that more needs to be done. I'd like to remind my colleague that there's one country in the G20 that has put an end to fossil fuel subsidies, and that is Canada. We've committed to going even further by eliminating public funding, which no other country in the world has committed to doing. And the cap on greenhouse gas emissions is coming. We're the only major oil producer in the world to have proposed putting a cap on those emissions, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Bloc and the Prime Minister are not worth the cost. The Bloc has always voted with the Liberals on government budgets. We're talking about $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending, and that hurts. This spending increases the cost of living and keeps interest rates high. With the Bloc, Quebecers are going hungry. They're having trouble housing themselves, and they are hurting. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, stop wasting money so that Quebecers
What's
can
up, Max?
once again
Good to see you, man. It's
afford
been a while.
decent housing and food? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I am really pleased to have another opportunity to refer to the Governor of the Bank of Canada, who shared very good news today with Canadians. He said, the message to Canadians is the following: we are getting closer to the goal. He's also said that it's our government's fiscal responsibility that has allowed him to stabilize inflation, and that will allow us to reduce the overnight rate.
Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island, and Rideau Lakes.
After
There we
9
go,
years
Barrett.
of this
Let's
NDP
bring on some
Liberal
fun.
government, the employment minister has been caught in shady lobbying, and we can see that this prime minister and his government certainly aren't worth the cost or the corruption. The minister was caught cashing checks from a lobbying firm that was lobbying his own government, his own ministry. How much taxpayer cash did this minister and his company shove in their pockets? How much? How much? How much?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
McKinnon is a troll.
Order.
He is a troll. Like, you tell me that he's not after this.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the minister has always followed the very strict ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. Canada has one of the strictest ethics regimes in the world for elected officials, and that is exactly what Canadians expect. The minister has always conducted himself in an ethical manner that follows the spirit and letter of those rules.
That's right. Good answer.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know that the fish rots from the head down. And this Prime Minister twice found guilty of breaking ethics laws, along with multiple members of his front bench and his back bench. We know that the minister tried to hide that he was getting money from his company that was lobbying his own government, even his own ministry, but he got caught. Global News reported it, and now we're asking him about it. So instead of having the government House Leader protect him from his own accountability, his own actions, will he stand up today and tell us how much money he took?
Barrett's fun, guys. Like, I don't know if you know about Barrett, but he's like a badger.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I just gave that answer. Thank you.
The Honourable Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau
Third
Lakes.
time for Barrett.
Oh,
That's fun.
You only,
Oh, he screwed up again.
I never knew I was so popular on this side. The Honourable Member from Dorval,
The Honourable Member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Red Dress Day, which raises awareness of the alarming rates of violence,
Join calls for the introduction of a red dress alert system. This system would be crucial in promptly informing the public whenever an Indigenous woman, girl, or two-spirited person goes missing. Can the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations share with us what measures are being taken to address this critical issue? Thank you so much.
The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize the advocates, families, and survivors working tirelessly to press our government for urgent action. That includes the member from Winnipeg Centre and the member from Oakville, North Burlington. Folks like Sandra DeLorme, Hilda Anderson-Pierce, Leslie Varley, Angela McDougall, Gladys Raddick, Lorna Brown, and Denise Halfyard, who are advancing the implementation of a red dress alert system. Their efforts are crucial in bringing Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit people home safely. And I thank the member from Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle for our advocacy leveraging the $1.3 million in Budget 2024. Our government will put an end.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, the sole Liberal
Cooper,
minister
let's
from
go.
Alberta is at the centre of two corruption scandals. It has been reported that the minister is tied to a lobbyist who received a staggering $110 million in federal contracts, and the minister is the director of a company that received a further $8 million of government contracts and is engulfed in allegations of fraud and wire fraud. So, how much money did this minister and his companies receive from these shady contracts?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier in response to our other honourable friend, the Minister has always followed the strict ethics rules that apply to him as an elected official. Canada has one of the strictest ethics regimes in the world for elected officials, and that is exactly what Canadians expect. The Minister has always conducted himself in an ethical manner that follows the spirit and letter of those rules.
I didn't think he could get worse than Gould. McKinnon is worse than
Speaker,
Gould.
the minister has been on the take with taxpayers' money. The minister retains a 50% stake in a company that is engulfed in allegations of fraud, and the minister continues to receive payments from the lobbying firm that received $110 million in federal contracts. So will the minister finally have the guts to stand in his place and tell Canadians how much he pocketed off taxpayers?
I will come back to this matter later, but I do warn members, please, to be very careful about what they say about other honourable members. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in this House, all members are entitled to be treated by other members with a presumption of being honourable. That is not what this member has just done. I would invite him to carefully consider the words that he just employed while doing a speech into a television camera, one that he would never do were we outside this chamber. And I would invite that member to be very, very careful with his words in the future.
The Honourable Member from Brantford Brant.
After 9 years of
Here we
this
go,
NDP
Brock.
Liberal government, yet another Liberal minister is embroiled in an ethics scandal. This employment minister continued to serve as a director of a company that secured over $8 million in government contracts. And his former lobbying firm got direct access to the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Minister's office, everyone who has their hands on the purse strings. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption. Simple question. How much did this minister or his companies receive since he's been in cabinet?
Oh, hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question, and I would once again invite members from all sides of this House to be very, very careful with the words that they utter.
Listen, he's threatening him, it sounds like. That sounded like a
The
threat.
Honourable Member from West Vancouver Sunshine
I wouldn't
Coast,
threaten Larry
Cedar
Brock
Saskatchewan.
if I was Steve McKinnon.
Budget 2024 proposes
Friggin'
funding
loser.
for Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate, which will support community outreach, law enforcement reform, tackle the rise in hate crimes, enhance community security, counter radicalization, and increase support for victims. This plan was drafted way before Canadians realized that the leader of the official opposition was cozying up with white nationalists. Can the minister please tell this House what impacts far-right extremism has on our community?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity.
Mr. Speaker, combating hate is a responsibility of everyone in this House. Anything otherwise is shameful and frankly appalling. When the leader of the opposition decided to cozy up to far-right extremist supporters, it is unbecoming of any elected official, much less the leader of the major political party.
That's what you're doing.
When
Cooper is
Honourable
flipping
Member
out.
From St. Albert, Edmonton, was asking his question. It was recommended by the chair. The chair was quite happy to make sure that the Honourable Member had a free time to be able to ask his question. I'd ask the Honourable Member, please, to hold back his comments while the Minister is
Cooper's
answering.
flipping out.
The Honourable
Fair
Minister
enough.
for Diversity from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, when the leader of the opposition decided to cozy up to far-right extremist supporters, it is unbecoming of any elected official, much less the leader of a major Canadian political party. Canadians expect their leaders to stand up for Canadian values. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we're investing $270 million in the budget for Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate. Mr. Speaker, that's leadership.
Cooper, listen to Cooper. This is awesome. It's not awesome, it's sad, but like, it's entertaining. Look at him. What a stiff.
The honourable member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday 10,000 Canadian rail workers voted to strike because, in part, Canada's two largest railway companies want to undermine key safety measures in their collective agreements. The safety of rail workers, the safety of rail communities, and the safety of our environment are all at stake. Will the minister ensure the parties remain at the bargaining table until a fair, safe, and equitable agreement is reached? Hear, hear.
Taylor Backrath is the NDP MP that
The Honourable Minister for Labour.
distrust the least.
What
I
is
think
happening
he'll
right now is
change
a cooling off
parties.
period is a normal part of the collective bargaining process. Our facilitators and conciliators remain closely with both parties at the table. We remain committed on this side, as I know the honourable member is, to making sure that the table remains, the best deals are made at the table. Thank you very much for the question.
The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, even for the Liberals, this is really something. It's a hat trick. 3 times, 3 different platform promises broken in one omnibus budget bill. First up, they broke the commitment to have UNDRIP honored and to consult with Indigenous people. Second, they used an omnibus budget bill to change environmental legislation. Third, once again, they failed to fix the Environmental Assessment Act. Let's make it simple. Environmental assessment under Mulroney's law worked. Harper repealed it. It still doesn't work. This draft in this Ways and Means bill will go down to defeat at the Supreme Court. Once again, fix it once and for all and use the environmental expert panel to guide your action.
Don't have a stroke. Just kidding, that's a bad joke. I like Liz May.
I thank my honourable colleague for her question. As per the Supreme Court asked us to do, we have brought changes to the Impact Assessment Act of Canada to ensure that the federal government would do what the federal government is supposed to be doing while provinces do their part in impact assessment. And we're confident that this will help us to move forward. And I would remind my honourable colleague that at the time that this bill was adopted, C-69, we did not have clean fuel standards. We did not have zero-emission vehicle standards. We did not have regulations on methanes. We weren't working on a cap on oil and gas emissions or clean electricity standard, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Bravo.
Yeah. Bravo.
Let me get it for you, my friend.
And such comes to the end of question period.
All right, gang. So that's going to wrap up question. That's going to wrap up the question period. But we have some more videos to watch. This is an interesting piece. Again, it's a weird thing. I'm just learning about all this stuff. I didn't know how corrupt and against Pierre Poilievre, the CBC, is. But I saw a minute of this piece and I was like, I'm not going to watch the whole thing. I just want to show it to the audience. You tell me if the CBC is not picking directly on Pierre Poilievre in this video. Because they wouldn't say shit like this about Trudeau. They just wouldn't.
Canada's constitution has a backdoor, a fully legal way of circumventing the baseline rights and freedoms guaranteed to us by the Canadian Charter.
We're ready to use the notwithstanding clause.
A notwithstanding clause?
Notwithstanding clause. Yes, it's called the notwithstanding clause. Not exactly the sexiest name for basically the thing that uses the Charter to short-circuit other parts of the Charter, but it's still kind of taboo. Pierre Poilievre, for example, is promising to get tough on crime in a way that might not be entirely constitutional.
It will be jail and not bail. Multiple murderers will stay in maximum security. Multiple murderers will only ever come out of jail in a box.
But he won't exactly say how he'll pass laws that violate, for example, a multiple murderer's right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment.
We will make them constitutional using whatever tools the Constitution allows me to use to make them constitutional. I think you know exactly what I mean.
It's a pretty prickly topic. He tiptoed around it again a day later.
We're going to put the criminals in jail, and we're going to do so with laws that are fully constitutional.
So how often are you going to use the notwithstanding clause?
And just so there's no ambiguity, I haven't heard from a single person who's unclear what Poilievre is talking about.
I think I know exactly what he means. And in part, it's because Mr. Poilievre, it's not the first time he's referenced the notwithstanding clause.
So there's no doubt about it. He was talking that he would be the first prime minister to bring in, for the first time, the notwithstanding clause in the federal parliament.
So why is this constitutional backdoor so unmentionable? Why might it be useful? And why do some think it threatens to rip apart the very fabric of our democratic ideals? Let's talk about it. I'll get to the incredible power of the notwithstanding clause in just a second, but I just want to be clear on one thing first. A big part of why everyone's so sure Poilievre intends to invoke the clause if he becomes prime minister is because he explicitly promised to. The same year he became conservative leader. I mean, just look for yourself. As prime minister, I will use the notwithstanding clause. That's about as clear as it gets. It's on Pierre Poilievre's stationery and everything. The reason he wants to do this goes back to the Supreme Court case of Alexandre Bissonnette, who pleaded guilty to killing 6 people in a Quebec City mosque in 2017.
We're hearing from witnesses that people were shot while they were in mid-prayer. We're hearing from other witnesses that they could hear the bullets flying overhead.
Prosecutors called for Bissonnette to serve 6 life sentences, one for each victim. But they wanted those sentences served consecutively, one after another. Do the math, that's 150 years in prison before any chance of parole, but the Supreme Court ruled that's inhumane. Such sentences are degrading in nature and thus incompatible with human dignity because they deny offenders any possibility of reintegration into society.
The court actually says, look, you have to give people, even if they've committed the worst crimes, this sense of hope that at some stage they will see the light of day again, to give them the ability to rehabilitate themselves.
Now, I'll say, even the Liberal government at the time said it was disappointed by the Supreme Court ruling. Poilievre, though, vowed to do what the Liberals would not, which is, in effect, to overrule the highest court in the land. He promised to do that again this week, several times. But how is that even possible? Like, doesn't the Supreme Court represent peak authority in this country? Almost. If 1867 was the year Canada was born, 1982 was the year it came of age. The year we stopped being a legal colony of Great Britain. The year we gained control over our own constitution. And the year we entrenched our Charter of Rights and Freedoms as the law of the land. A law every court would swear to uphold. But the one big concession in making that happen was the inclusion of an override clause.
What's up, Cuba Bound? Good to see you.
Which is part of the Charter itself.
We need some kind of mechanism that allows for legislatures and parliament to be able to also respond in the event that judicial power is used inappropriately, or that there's a decision that we just simply can't live with as a democracy.
And thus, Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, was born. So, how does it work? Well, it specifically lays out the parts of the Charter that can be ignored if lawmakers expressly say that's what they're doing. So, you know, things like freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of peaceful assembly. These and several other freedoms can be overridden using the notwithstanding clause. Then consider those legal rights that we all hold. Things like the right against unreasonable search and seizure, the right against arbitrary arrest and detention, the right to bail, the right to a fair trial, the right against cruel and unusual punishment. That last one, cruel and unusual punishment, that's where Poilievre is likely to get tripped up, wanting to keep multiple murderers in jail for their entire lives. The notwithstanding clause would let him ignore that. The override lasts for 5 years, at which point it can just be renewed again if the government in power so desires. And once invoked, there's no real way to challenge Section 33 on the grounds that it contravenes the Charter. I mean, it exists expressly to contravene the Charter. So in that sense, the decision generally just stands.
Even its great supporters really didn't think it was going to be frequently used. The political costs would be so high that maybe the notwithstanding clause would kind of stay in the closet, and you know it's not going to come out. It's the bear spray nobody needs because there's no bears around.
Except things have changed quite a bit over the years.
Like everything, our political, I think, consensus has become a little more fractured.
first nearly 40 years of the Charter, the notwithstanding clause had almost exclusively been used by Quebec, mainly as a way of protesting a constitution that they didn't sign on to. Yukon tried using it once on a land planning issue. Saskatchewan used it to settle a labor dispute. Alberta tried twice. Both attempts ended in failure. But only in the last 5-6 years have we seen a real ramp up in use of the notwithstanding clause by provinces.
Our first order of business will be to reintroduce the Better Local Government Act, and with it invoke Section 33 of the Constitution.
In 2018, Doug Ford threatened to invoke the clause because he wanted to slash the size of Toronto City Council during a municipal election. He said it was to make government more efficient and effective. Critics said, "You're doing this during an election? This is ridiculous, and you're undermining democracy."
Why do it right in the middle of an election? That smacks clearly of using it for political reasons, not for any other reasons.
In the end, Doug Ford got his way without actually having to pull the trigger on using the clause. 3 years later, he decided to invoke the clause again to change election advertising rules. It worked. He used it, despite a lower court ruling that the law violated freedom of expression. Now, did any of that hurt him politically? Didn't seem to.
What a night and what a result!
Ontario is waking up to 4 more years of Doug Ford. His Progressive Conservative Party sailed to an even bigger majority.
A few months later, he decided he would short-circuit the charter a third time to prevent education support workers from going on strike.
Premier Doug Ford is reaching for the legal tool meant as a last resort, invoking the notwithstanding clause to avoid a school workers' strike.
Those workers, fed up, went on strike anyway.
Solidarity! There was almost a general strike across Ontario to oppose that use of the notwithstanding clause, and the Ontario government stepped back and decided not to use the notwithstanding clause in that circumstance.
Now, maybe you're thinking, so it all works out. The notwithstanding clause isn't some kind of magic wand with unlimited power. Sure, but it's also not just Ontario. Quebec used the clause twice in the last 5 years, once to ban religious symbols for people in authority.
Basically, it's take off your scarf if you want to continue and work as a teacher. And for me, this is out of the question.
And then a second time to expand the requirement that businesses communicate in French.
It's about protecting something that will always be vulnerable, which is our language in Quebec.
Then, most recently, just last year, Scott Moe in Saskatchewan invoked the notwithstanding clause to pass a law requiring parents to be notified of any pronoun changes for their kids at school. Point being, we haven't in decades seen such an extensive use of this constitutional kill switch as we have lately. Now, I want to be as fair as possible here. There's a reason that the notwithstanding clause exists.
Politicians said we don't want a situation like in the American Supreme Court, when if you hand over absolute power to judges, there is a concern that that can politicize that branch of the court in a way that can be unhealthy. And the downside is that vulnerable minorities whose rights are not well protected in majoritarian politics will not find it very comforting to know that that there is a way that majorities can simply implement their will.
The question of whether Pierre Poilievre would really attempt to become the first prime minister in Canadian history, if elected, to circumvent the charter in this way. I mean, his thoughts on that seem pretty clear.
I will be the democratically elected prime minister, democratically accountable to the people, and they can then make the judgments themselves on whether they think my laws are constitutional, because they will be.
This is a policy he's likely to lean in on. He believes more Canadians are worried about crime than are worried about the notwithstanding clause.
But what hitting that notwithstanding button will mean for the country, that's harder to answer.
If it is going to be used by Pierre Poilievre for this reason, then there's going to be a lobby to do it for almost everything.
In the short term, we've seen examples of the clause being used to just cut to the chase. Get the job done in as expedient and no-nonsense a way as possible. But long-term?
If you want to have a democracy where you get a slim majority, and then you can basically use any law to underwrite any law, any right, then you're not really a democracy.
There's no right or wrong answer here, but there is a fierce debate with a lot at stake.
All right, gang, we've got one more video to show. I never want to fool the audience into like just watching more of my stuff, but I think it's important for as many Canadians to possibly see this piece about Rachel Thomas and Greg Fergus. So I'm going to show that again. Many of you probably have seen this, so I don't expect you to hang out. This is the wrap up of the show, and I'm going to run this one. And then that will be the end of the show. So this is the ending bookend, and I'm not trying to scare people away. I want you to watch this piece. If you have not seen it, it's super interesting. If you've seen it already, though, I get it. You don't need to watch it again. If you have not seen this, though, please check this out because Canadians need to see this stuff.
What a shameful, spineless leadership looks like.
Thank you all so much. It's been great. To Sheila, Kirk, Patty, Mr. Pickles, there's so many, and all the new people. What a treat. Anyways, we're here all the time learning about Canadian federal politics. It would seem like this is a conservative channel. It's not. This is a channel of change. Like, there was a time I wanted the conservatives out, and then I didn't pay attention. But these liberals these days seem to be a different type of cabinet. Like, so corrupt, guys. Like, you know when someone's lying right to your face, and that's what they do. They've got no issue about it. It's tough to watch. But anyhow, this is this one. Greg Fergus is going to have a tough time talking himself out of.
Order.
That's it, guys. Thank you all for watching.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Lethbridge if she has problems with the chair, that she should challenge the chair in a way. But as she knows, as the honourable member from Lethbridge knows, that by challenging the chair is against the rules of this House. I'll ask the honourable member to please to ask her to withdraw her remarks.
The chair is acting in a disgraceful manner.
I'm going to ask you, will you... Ms. Harder, I have to name you for disregarding the authority of the chair. Pursuant to authority granted to me by Standing Order 11, I order you to withdraw from the House and from any participation by video conference for the remainder of this day's sitting. Now back to the issue at hand. Mrs. Thomas, my apologies. Now back to the original point. I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to please, as I'd ask the Leader of the Opposition, to start from again and to make sure that he does, to start his question, and to reframe it in a way that does not call into the character of an individual member of Parliament. The Honourable Prime Minister, Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Ehren, right here, Question Period Canada. So you saw when Rachel Thomas and Pierre Poilievre got kicked out of the House of Commons on Tuesday. Well, Rachel Thomas is coming back. This lady is on fire, and she has reasons to be. Like, if you listen to this whole piece, it's super interesting, a little slow, but my goodness, guys. Rachel Thomas has an argument to make, and I think Greg Fergus, the House Speaker, Mr. Speaker, who won't sit down and be quiet, has a lot to deal with here. Like, let's check out the video. Here it goes. Rachel Thomas, Woman on Fire. She's a cowgirl from Alberta. Giddy up.
Here.
Interesting.
And I will just point out that if we flip through them on this page here, you can see my words are kindly highlighted for you. Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of privilege today regarding a significant discrepancy between what was published in the Blues and what was published in Hansard of yesterday. The question of privilege that I raise also has to do with how I was treated by the Speaker of this House and how I was further portrayed publicly. The discrepancy between the Blues and what was published in the Hansard is the omission of two words. Two very important documented words. An exchange between the Speaker and me during question period yesterday. The Blues recorded the following statement by the Speaker. I quote directly. If the Honourable Member for Lethbridge has problems with the Chair, she should challenge the Chair in a respectful way. But as the Honourable Member knows, challenging the Chair is against the rules of this House. I ask the Honourable Member to please withdraw her remarks. To which I replied, and rose in my space, to say this, quote, Mr. Speaker, I stated that the Chair is acting in a disgraceful manner. I withdraw. In the Hansard recording, two words are missing. The words, I withdraw.
Wow.
That said, it should be noted that it is reported in Hansard that at least one member did point out to the Speaker that these words in fact were spoken. It says under the heading, an honourable other member, it says the following, quote, she withdrew it. In the audio recording, many other members were heard drawing attention to this fact, asking for the Speaker to do the same. These words, Mr. Speaker, are significant because they demonstrate that I complied with the Speaker, your request to withdraw. It demonstrates that my withdrawal was not conditional, but rather it was proper and textbook. Therefore, it ought to have been accepted. Yet, I was kicked out of this place for the remainder of the day, as if I hadn't withdrawn those words, or to put it another way, as if Hansard recording of the event was accurate and true, when in fact, Mr. Speaker, we know it is not. If you were to check the audio recording, it clearly picked up the two words that are also recorded in the Blues. It is worth noting that in Chapter 24 of Bosch and Gagnon, it states, quote, the chamber is equipped with cameras operated from a control room, invisible from the floor of the House. The recording of the proceedings is governed by guidelines intended to preserve the concept of the electronic Hansard, as adopted by the House. The two words, Mr. Speaker, that were edited out of the Hansard essentially rewrote history, making the actions and procedure followed by the Speaker, you, appear proper and mine improper. As you know, I was removed from the chamber for the remainder of the day, and I was prohibited from being able to participate in debate or vote on behalf of the constituents who have sent me here. Therefore, the constituents of Lethbridge were robbed of having a presence and a voice in the House of Commons, their democratic right. It was especially egregious given the fact that there was a scheduled vote immediately following question period that day. If you go to the House of Commons site, the Blues, unfortunately, are no longer available. Interesting. Which makes a person curious as to why. If you attempt to access the Blues today, you will get this message, quote, Blues are available while the House is in session until the Hansard is published. The Blues are taken down. Luckily, though, Mr. Speaker, for you, I kept a copy of those Blues that were sent to me yesterday at the end of the day, and I have them available to submit to you here.
Interesting.
And I will just point out that if we flip through them on this page here, you can see my words are kindly highlighted for you.
Wow. Obstruction.
Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we are fortunate to also have access to the audio recording, which still exists and does not lie.
It's real funny, isn't it?
She is
hilarious.
At pages 1228 to 1229 of the third edition of House of Commons Procedure and Practice, it states, quote, The unedited in extenso transcripts of the debates, at one time produced on blue paper, continue to be known as the Blues. Parliamentary publications staff send to each member who speaks in the House the transcription of the member's intervention. The Blues are also published on the House of Commons internal website. The availability of the Blues on the House of Commons internal website permits members and their authorized delegates to use the web page or email to submit suggested changes for parliamentary publications editorial staff to consider. Members may suggest corrections to errors and minor altercations to the transcription, but may not make material changes to the meaning of what was said in the House. I'm going to read that part again because it's really important. They may not make material changes to the meaning of what was said in the House. So it's interesting then that the Blues said one thing, but Hansard said another, and I did not ask for those changes to be made. The third edition of the House of Commons procedure goes on to say this: it is a long-standing practice of the House that editors of the debates may exercise judgment as to whether or not changes suggested by members constitute the correction of an error or a minor alteration. The editors may likewise alter a sentence to render it more readable, but may not go so far as to change its meaning. Editors must ensure that the debates are a faithful reflection of what was said. Any changes made, whether by the members or editors, are for the sole purpose of improving the readability of the text, given the difference between the spoken and written word. End quote. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, I did not suggest any changes to the officials with regard to Hansard. Bosch and Gagnon state that the editors can make alterations but cannot make changes that go so far as to change the meaning of what was said. In the case I raised today, the significant difference in meaning without these two words, I withdraw, being published in Hansard obviously is very significant. On page 1229, it goes on to say, when a question arises in the House as to the accuracy of the record, it is the responsibility of the Speaker to look into the matter. In this case, the edit, otherwise known as the deletion of two very significant words, is far more noteworthy than simply improving the readability of a sentence. I believe you'll agree. The justification used by the Speaker to admonish and remove me from the chamber does not match the evidence presented in the Blues and by the audio recording that you may also access. The Speaker's actions do, however, fit very nicely with the altered text published in the Hansard. On page 82 of Bosch and Gagnon, it describes a list of items to be considered a contempt, and on that list is, quote, falsifying or altering any papers belonging to the House, end quote. At page 248 of Joseph Magnon's Parliamentary Privilege in Canada, second edition, it states, quote, the House of Commons of Canada remains prepared to entertain legitimate questions of privilege where false or perverted reports of debates or proceedings are published, end quote. While this passage refers to inaccurate media reports of what was published in Hansard, it is no less offensive, and in fact perhaps more offensive, that this happened right here in the House of Commons. At pages 81 to 83 of Bosch Gagnon, it states, and I quote, throughout the Commonwealth, most procedural authorities hold that contempts, as opposed to privileges, cannot be enumerated or categorized. Speaker Sauvé explained in a 1980 ruling, while our privileges are defined, contempt of the House has no limits. When new ways are found to interfere with our proceedings, so too will the House, in appropriate cases, be able to find that a contempt of the House has occurred. Just as it is not possible to categorize or to delineate every incident which may fall under the definition of contempt, it is also difficult to categorize the severity of contempt. Contempts may vary greatly in their gravity. Matters ranging from minor breaches of decorum to grave attacks against the authority of Parliament may be considered as contempts." End quote. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be debated or disputed that someone deliberately removed 2 words from the Blues, and that these 2 words have great significance. It cannot be debated or disputed that it therefore changed the meaning of the events yesterday and the way that they would be interpreted, thus resulting in an inaccurate negative reflection of me, which was then broadcasted to my constituents and to all people across Canada. Furthermore, this inaccurate account of events resulted in my wrongful dismissal from this place by you, thus robbing me of the right to represent the constituents of Lethbridge here in the House of Commons and to cast a vote on their behalf, again robbing them of their democratic right. Which leads to another aspect of privilege, and that is improper reflections upon a member. On October 20th, 1966, the member for Edmonton Strathcona rose on a question of privilege that came out of an article in Le Droit of October 14th by Marcel Pépin. He argued that the article imputed an improper motive to him and was a gross distortion of the facts of something that occurred in the House. The Speaker ruled the matter to be a prima facie question of privilege on October 24th, 1966. In my case, it is the Hansard that has recorded a gross distortion of the facts, an act that can be substantiated by the Blues and the audio recordings of the procedures I referred to from yesterday, April 30th. I will give another example. On March 22nd, 1983, Speaker Sauvé ruled on a question of privilege relating to false and libelous accusations against the member for Lincoln that had been published in the Montreal Gazette. The Speaker felt that a reflection upon the reputation of an honourable member is a matter of great concern to all members of the House. And the Speaker said at that time, quote, "It places the entire institution under a cloud, as it suggests that among the members of the House there are some who are unworthy to sit there. An allegation of criminal or other dishonourable conduct inevitably affects the member's ability to function effectively while the matter remains unresolved." End quote. Mr. Speaker, the matter I am addressing today is grave in nature and calls for your utmost attention. In summary, the matter I am bringing to your attention today has 3 components. 1, the Speaker's ruling to expel me from the House. 2, the improper alteration of the Hansard. And 3, the inaccurate reporting as to the role that I played here in this place. Mr. Speaker, if you rule this matter to be a prima facie question of privilege, I am prepared to move the appropriate motion today.
I thank the honourable member. I thank the honourable member from Lethbridge for raising this matter of question of privilege. I do encourage her, please, to share all the information that she would like to have the speakership to evaluate, and certainly we will take this with extreme importance. I see that the honourable member from from Burnaby, New Westminster Burnaby, is rising on the same question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is related to the question that I raised last night, just prior to adjournment. You'll recall the ruling from former Speaker, the member from Regina Capel, who is now the Conservative House Leader, dating back to September 24th, 2014. And I'll read it for the record again. Another of our time-honored traditions is that of respect for the office of Speaker. And our procedural Bible, O'Brien and Bosca, page 313, states that reflections on the character or actions of the Speaker, an allegation of bias, for example, could be taken by the House as breaches of privilege and punished accordingly. And the Speaker at the time, the member for Regina Capel, the current Conservative House Leader, said, continued by saying, "I wish to conclude with an appeal to members on all sides Needless to say, the kind of unsavory language or expression that we heard yesterday does little to assist the chair in managing question period proceedings. And I urge all members to be judicious in the expressions that they choose to use. Now, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, I raised the issue of the tweet that was put out by the member from Lethbridge, who said the following: "How did partisan hack," referring to the Speaker, "respond? This is inappropriate, a very clear contravention of all of..."
I thank the honourable member and the opposition house, opposition whip. The honourable member is clearly rising on, not on the issue that was raised by the member of Lethbridge, but on a point of order that he is raising.
He recognized him and he asked to speak on the same questions. It even says it up for the
That was, I think that was an, if we can hold on for a second. So I think this is clearly an error which I made by presuming that the member was rising on the question of privilege that was raised, the serious question of privilege that was raised by the member from Lethbridge. I'm going to go back to the member of New Westminster Burnaby if there is another member who would like to comment on the question of privilege first. Sorry, so that's the member from Sandwich Gulf Islands who wants to rise to comment on the question of privilege. And then I will go to the new question of order afterwards.
So what do you think, gang? Is Fergus in big trouble? Should he start to just sit down and be quiet? Sounds like a good idea to me. It would make the flow of the question periods a lot smoother if he would do his job the way it should be done. That reminds me to mention, you should come and join one of our live shows. We cover the question period broadcast daily. It's fun. We've got a great chat room. We're doing some other videos and stuff. Check those out. So like, subscribe, share, comment, all that stuff. Get notified for the live shows. That's the bottom line. We see this stuff live all the time, and it's fun. We've got a great chat room, like I mentioned. It's such a great group. You'd have to come and see. Check it out. That's it. Ehren, Question Period Canada, thank you very much for watching this video. Good luck to Rachel Thomas and good luck to Greg Fergus. See you later, buddy. Anyhow, catch the next video. Thanks for watching this one. Have something healthy to eat today. Try to stay warm. Summer's coming. All right.
Canada's constitution